What's up guys, I'm Sega Lord X, and in this episode we're going to be going over Sega Saturn arcade sticks. Now, I don't own every stick available for the system, but I do own a pretty good variety. We're going to go over the 6 that I own, and we're going to talk about the games that benefit from each of them. Let's get started. Alright guys, the very first one we're going to take a look at is the Hori Real Arcade VF HSS09. This, I know exactly what you're thinking. 3 buttons? How the hell am I supposed to play Street Fighter with this? Well, you're not going to play Street Fighter too well with this particular one. This stick was made for Sega's arcade fighters. Think Virtua Fighter 1 and 2, Fighting Vipers, Last Bronx, Fighters Megamix, fighters in that mold. And a lot of people pass by this stick because of that. And depending on exactly what you want it for, that is a big mistake, because this is an extremely well-made arcade stick. And if you're wanting it just for arcade gameplay in general, for stuff like shoot 'em ups, platformers, Sega's fighting games, this is an absolutely fantastic stick. Let's go ahead and open the box and take a look at it. Alright guys, as you can see, it is a really robust arcade stick. It has a metal plated top right here. It's got a very heavy plastic base to it in terms of the frame, and underneath of it is a very sturdy metal bottom. The joystick itself is ball top and has what feels like a square gate, and it has that very good clicking, and it's got a nice loose feel to it. It's not super tight, it's not super loose, it just feels really good. The buttons feel very good, and this is just a fantastic stick. If you're looking to play shoot 'em ups with this, I went ahead and tried it out on a number of my games. I found that it worked well with just about everything I could throw at it. Like I was saying in the opening, it's definitely not a Capcom fighter stick. It's not even an SNK fighter stick, because the Neo Geo had 4 buttons, so you're still missing a button. The only other button it has besides the A, B, and C is the actual start button over here. So, I mean, it wouldn't be too comfortable to play with an SNK fighter either. But it did work well with Metal Slug. It worked well with Layers section. It worked awesome with Virtua Fighter 1 and 2. So this stick definitely has a place depending on what you want to use it for. If you are primarily a Capcom SNK fighter guy and that's what you want an arcade stick for, you're going to want to skip this one. But if you have a variety that you're looking at for an arcade stick in terms of just arcade gameplay, especially 2D gameplay, man, this stick is well built, feels great, and is definitely within the price range that you can pick it up fairly easy. Alright, our next stick is the ECLIPSE stick by Interact. Now this stick here is dirt cheap, and when I found this stick, I think I paid $15 for it maybe. It is not an expensive stick, and you're gonna see why when I take it out of the box. It is definitely the cheapest of the Sega Saturn sticks that I have found, not just in price but in the way that it's made. Let's go ahead and get this one out of the box and take a look at it. Alright, here is the ECLIPSE stick. As you can see, it is fairly small. It has a joystick on it. Let's listen to it. No click at all. It doesn't feel very satisfying. The buttons feel more like a button on a regular Saturn controller instead of what you would expect from an arcade stick. The bottom of it is metal, so it does give it a teensy bit of weight. Kind of feels like, do you remember the Sega Genesis arcade sticks that came out from Sega, the 3 and 6 button one? It reminds me very much of that. Now, you're thinking to yourself, piece of junk, right? This thing is useless. Well, it really depends on what you're using it for, because I did find some games that worked well with it. because it has programmable rapid fire settings on the controller, and because the joystick does have a snappiness to it, and the buttons, while they don't feel like an arcade stick, they don't feel terrible. I found games like Decathlete and Winter Heat and arcade style like buttons where fast button presses and things of that nature. Actually, this stick worked well for it. I also tried it with some of Sega's arcade games and found that it actually worked pretty decent with those too. Believe it or not, this thing actually works okay with Virtual On. I mean, you have to play it with the way you set up the controller, but for what it is and how it works, it actually isn't terrible. The buttons are spread out in a manner to where your fingers can really get a feel for what would feel like a second stick. And it has a feel to it that you can really get used to. So you definitely have a set of games that will benefit from this. It's not many. It wouldn't be my first choice when buying a Saturn stick, but it does have its uses, especially for the price that this thing goes for. They're very cheap, they're very easy to find, and you can usually find them in box even cheap. Definitely not top end, but I wouldn't call it completely useless either. Alright, moving right along guys, we have the Virtua Stick from Sega themselves. Now this is the actual first edition of the Virtua Stick, the cheaper edition, and this stick was the very first arcade stick that I ever bought for the Saturn. And when I first got it, I bought it for fighting games, I bought it for shoot 'em ups, I bought them pretty much for everything. And it's got some options that I really appreciate. It is not a high quality stick by any means. They do tend to be on the less expensive side, so if you're looking for an all-around stick, something to mess around with, something for your, something that your kid can play with too and play shoot 'em ups and platformers, this actually does have some use. We're gonna go ahead and open it up and take a look at it. Alright, here is the Virtua Stick out of its box, and as you can see, it has the rapid fire set up at the top to cut it on and off, and then it has a speed setting over here where you can actually control the speed of the rapid fire. The buttons do not feel like arcade buttons. Again, they feel kind of like the ECLIPSE stick, where it feels more like a button would feel on a controller. It does have the L and R buttons on the controller, the start button, and the stick. Let's listen. Yeah, that's right. It doesn't have that nice clicky of the micro switches, which is disappointing because had this controller had a slightly better stick, I believe it would have been great for more games than it's actually useful for. As it stands though, for the price that you pay for it, this is still not a terrible stick. It plays well with Sega's arcade games. Think Decathlete again, Die Hard Arcade. It plays okay with Sega's racing games that play decent with the controller. It plays okay with shooters and fighters. It's not great. Again, it's definitely not your first choice for fighting games, but I did try some shooters with it and found that the stick does have a relatively solid enough response to where it's usable. So for the price that you pay for it, not a terrible overall basic stick if you're looking for all genres to be used with it. Primarily Sega stuff tends to play with it fairly well. I also had some success with Virtua Cop and House of the Dead with it. I found that playing with the stick for whatever reason seemed to be a little more accurate. I don't know if the game recognizes the stick. I wouldn't think so, since it's still just a digital, readout from it. But for what it's worth, if you're looking for genres that aren't just fighting and you're not that hardcore Capcom guy that, has to modify controllers, because you're not going to be modifying this one very much. This is just your basic entry-level cheap controller, and I'd say it's okay. Alright, next man up is the Ascii Saturn stick. Now, I actually built a Sega Saturn arcade around these sticks because I actually found them fairly useful for general gameplay. These are another brand and style of stick that do not cost a lot. You can buy these in box on eBay for what is a relatively cheap price for what it is. Again, it's not something that I would recommend outright as a fighting game controller or a fighting game arcade stick primarily, because it's just not for that. General gameplay is what this guy is for, so let's get it out the box and take a look at it. Alright, here is the Ascii Saturn stick out of its box, and as you can see, it's got a very decent size to it. The plastic is pretty robust. It's nice and thick. The bottom of it is metal. And let's go ahead and listen to the stick. Alright, that's right. That's the reason why I chose this particular one for my Saturn arcade unit. I needed something with good all-around gameplay that didn't cost a lot of money. And of the cheap controllers that are available, the Interact ECLIPSE stick and the Sega Saturn first model Virtua stick, this is the best stick out of those cheap sticks. It is well made. The buttons still feel like they do on a Sega Saturn controller, but the arcade stick is pretty good. It's micro switched. It's got a nice feel to it. It's got the bat top. I don't know if you like those or not, but for what it is, for the cheap end of the Sega Saturn spectrum for arcade sticks, this one isn't bad. I found using it for games like Sega's arcade stuff, for general fighting games, you can actually get a fireball off with the Ascii stick fairly well. The uppercut comes off fairly well. You know, you can actually use this. Again, this is not a first choice as a fighting stick, but for general gameplay, this is the best of the baseline arcade sticks on the Saturn. I really like how it's made. I like how it looks. It's got some nice weight to it. The plastic is very well built on it, and I just found this stick to be the way to go for something that was going to get beat on constantly by my 10-year-old daughter. So it's held up fairly well in the arcade. It hasn't broken yet. The buttons, the stick, all still feel good after hours of gameplay, and this is definitely worth the money in my opinion, just for general gameplay. Again, especially if you have kids, man, because you don't want to go throwing a $100 plus controller up underneath a kid just so they can beat the hell out of it and break it. So general gameplay, general arcade stick, shoot 'em ups, things of that nature. This is actually a pretty decent stick, believe it or not. Alright, moving on to the very last two sticks. This right here, the Hori HSS07 Fighting Stick SS, is one of the better or best arcade sticks on the system. This one here hasn't gotten terribly expensive. It is extremely well made. It is the type of controller that you can use as a dedicated Sega Saturn fighting stick. It is the type of controller you can beat the hell out of and it'll keep on going. As you'll see here shortly, mine is actually well used. So let's go ahead and open it up and take a look at it. Alright, here is the Hori Fighting Stick SS out of its box. And it is an awesome fight stick, guys. I really like this one. Very well made. The only weakness that I can point out to this stick is the buttons don't feel 100% the way you want them to feel. They feel good, don't get me wrong, but they don't have quite as nice click as some of the higher end arcade sticks that are made today. But in terms of construction itself, you have the ball top stick. Let's go ahead and listen. Yes, a very nice micro switch feel to it. Everything feels really good. It feels like it's got the square gate in there. Very, it's tight but still loose enough to where it doesn't take a ton of effort to push it. Very nice. The top base, or the top plate, is made out of metal. It does have the rapid fire features that you would want in a stick. And if you turn it over, it has a metal base. So the Fighting Stick SS, it plays well with just about anything you throw at it. Capcom fighters, SNK fighters, shoot 'em ups, Sega's arcade games, played Decathlete and Winter Heat. Great with it. I found this controller to be awesome overall for what it is. It's not quite as easy to mod as a few of the other Saturn controllers, but I mean, just right out the box, if you just want something that isn't going to give you a headache, that is well made, that's going to work, this guy right here is definitely the way to go. The price is usually right on these guys. I've seen them anywhere between $50 and $100 in box, so you're not going to spend, you're not going to, break your wallet trying to find one and buy it. So the Hori Fighting Stick SS, highly recommended. Great controller, guys. Alright, last but not least, we have the Sega released Sega Saturn HSS 0136, the Virtua Stick, which in effect is the second model of this particular stick. We saw the first model, it was the black one from Sega. Now, this is a completely different controller, completely different made, completely different feel. Its intentions were completely different. The first stick from Sega that you saw, the first Virtua stick from Sega you saw, was entry level. It was meant for a market that anybody could buy a arcade stick. This stick here was meant for the upper echelon of the market. This was meant for the people that took playing their Capcom 2D fighters and Virtua Fighter and shooters very seriously. It has a design that is very reminiscent of the Japanese arcade machines of the day, and it is very well built. Let's go ahead and open it up and see what it looks like. Alright, here she is out of her box, and the designation is right on the controller in the corner, HSS 0136 Sega Enterprises Ltd. Now, this controller is without question the best controller on the system in my opinion. In build quality, in the way it feels, in the games that it works with, this is just an outstanding arcade controller. The first thing you have to look at is, of course, it's got your rapid fire settings for every button. It's got your speed setting at the very top. The buttons feel really good. They don't have quite the click to them that the higher end sticks of today have. Sometimes when you just get that, when you're in arcade sticks long enough, you just get that certain travel and click to the buttons that is just unbeatable. And that's one of the reasons why people choose this controller as well, because it's actually fairly easily moddable to get that kind of click and feel to the buttons. Now the good news is that right out the box, this is still a top-notch controller. I still love the way this controller feels. It works great with Street Fighter. It works great with SNK fighters. It works awesome with shoot 'em ups and Sega's arcade games. The stick over here is ball top and has a very awesome micro switch feel. I absolutely love the way it feels. Even the diagonals just have a perfect tension to it on the micro switches. It is just so good. I love the way that it feels. The actual construction of it, the plastic is thick and heavy and feels absolutely great. The top of the unit, as you can see here, feels absolutely kick-ass. It's metal. and the base here is metal as well, which gives the controller some heft, gives the controller some feel that you've actually bought something and owned something. And this controller tends to be the more expensive of the single Sega Saturn controllers. And I say single because there is actually a dual version of this controller as well. Sega released what was an entire arcade panel, 2 controllers that were laid out very similar to this in look and button layout. And I think that one, right off the top of my head without looking, I want to say it was the HSS 0130. I'll correct that in the description if I'm wrong, but that was a dual version of this controller, and that controller is absolutely the most expensive arcade controller you can buy for the Saturn. That thing goes for, in the box, it's $400 or so. But this controller here, if you watch auctions, you can tend to snipe it at around $100, and in my opinion, it is worth every penny of that. This controller is well made, it feels great out the box, and if you are so inclined, you can definitely upgrade it. You can change the buttons in it if you want to. You can make the controller even better than it is already. I will say this, when it comes to choosing a controller for yourself, meaning that you're the one that is primarily going to play it, this is definitely right here the controller that you want. You don't want to mess around with anything less than the best when it comes for controllers just for yourself. If you're looking for controllers that are going to see other people messing with it, the previous controller, the Hori Fighting Stick SS, is a great controller for that. And then if you're looking for something for basic gameplay, something that your kids can mess around with, any of the other controllers before that are pretty good. So that wraps up my Sega Saturn arcade stick lineup. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Okay guys, arcade sticks for the Sega Saturn. Now as we just went over, we have found that there is an arcade stick for every genre. The high-end stuff plays everything, but even the cheapy stuff can still work for some people. If you're a shoot 'em up fan, there are a number of choices you can go for. And even if you're a Capcom fan, the middle-end sticks such as the Hori Fighting Stick SS are not too terribly expensive if you watch the auctions. The Saturn does have a great selection of sticks here, considering just how old the system is. If you're looking for the very best, the Sega Saturn Virtua Stick, the second model of that guy, is definitely the way to go. It's well built, it's easily moddable, and it's just an all-around fantastic stick. I'm Sega Lord X. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I'll catch you next time.